The gunshot cracked through the frozen air like thunder, and Beatrice Langley watched in horror as her eldest brother tumbled face first into the snow, crimson blooming beneath him like a terrible flower. She had been running for 3 miles through the Wyoming wilderness, her lungs burning with each gasping breath, her skirts weighted down by snow and ice. The winter of 1885 had been brutal, and the storm that howled around her now seemed determined to bury the entire territory under white oblivion. Behind her, she could hear the shouts of her 5 brothers, their voices filled with rage and righteousness that she knew was misplaced. They thought they were protecting the family honor. They thought they had the right to drag her back home and force her into a marriage she would rather die than accept. Another shot rang out, and Thomas went down. Then Jacob. The remaining 2 brothers, William and Samuel, skidded to a halt in the deep snow, their faces pale with shock. The next one goes through a heart instead of a leg. A deep voice called out from somewhere among the pine trees. You boys get on home and tell your father that his daughter is under my protection now. Anyone comes looking for her, they will find the same welcome you just got. Beatrice's knees gave out and she collapsed into a snowdrift, her whole body shaking. She could not tell if it was from cold or fear or relief. Perhaps all 3. Through the curtain of falling snow, she watched as William and Samuel stumbled backward, then turned and ran, half carrying Thomas between them. Jacob was crawling after them, clutching his bleeding thigh and leaving a dark trail in the white landscape. Footsteps crunched through the snow toward her, and Beatrice looked up to see a tall figure emerging from the trees. He was broad-shouldered and wore a heavy coat that looked like it had seen better years, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. In his hands, he carried a rifle that still smoked slightly in the frigid air. As he drew closer, she could make out his features. A strong jaw darkened with several days of stubble, eyes the color of slate, and a mouth set in a grim line. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had been when he had threatened her brothers. Beatrice tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate. She had been running in thin boots through snow that sometimes reached her knees, and she could no longer feel her feet. "I do not know," she managed through chattering teeth. Without another word, the stranger slung his rifle over his shoulder and scooped her up in his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. Beatrice wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, but she was too cold and too exhausted to do anything but lean against his solid warmth. "There is a line shack about half a mile from here," he said, already moving through the snow with sure steps. "We need to get you warm before you lose any toes." "Who are you?" Beatrice whispered. "Name is Benjamin Jameson. I have been tracking those men for the better part of 2 hours, trying to figure out if they meant to kill you or just scare you." "They meant to take me home," Beatrice said bitterly. "Which might be worse than killing me." Benjamin glanced down at her, and she saw something shift in his gray eyes, understanding perhaps, or sympathy. "A woman running through a blizzard in nothing but a dress and a shawl is usually running from something pretty terrible," he said quietly. "I figured you could use some help." The line shack appeared through the snow like a miracle. A small wooden structure barely bigger than a large closet, but it had 4 walls and a roof, and that was more than Beatrice had hoped for. Benjamin kicked the door open and carried her inside, setting her down carefully on the single narrow cot that occupied one wall. The shack was bare except for the cot, a small stove, and a few supplies stacked in the corner. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes," Benjamin said, already moving to light the stove. "You have got a spare blanket in here somewhere." Beatrice's cheeks burned despite the cold. "I cannot just undress in front of you." "Then you will lose your feet to frostbite and probably die of exposure besides," Benjamin said bluntly, not looking at her as he coaxed flames to life in the little stove. "I am not going to touch you, and I am not going to look at you. But those clothes need to come off now, or you are not going to make it through the night." His matter-of-fact tone left no room for argument. With numb, fumbling fingers, Beatrice began to work at the buttons of her dress. It was a struggle. Her hands would barely cooperate, and the fabric was frozen stiff in places. After a moment, Benjamin turned around, keeping his eyes firmly fixed on her face as he helped her with the more stubborn fastenings. "Where were you headed?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral as he worked. "Anywhere that was not home," Beatrice said. "I was supposed to marry Harrison Tucker next week. He is 53 years old and he has already buried 2 wives. Everyone in town knows he beat them both, but my father does not care. Tucker has money and land, and my father has 5 sons to feed and a farm that barely produces enough to keep us through winter. I am 21 years old, and I have been told my whole life that it is my duty to marry well and help support the family." Benjamin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as he peeled away the last of her wet outer clothes and wrapped her in the rough wool blanket he had found. Her undergarments were damp but not soaked through, and he left those alone, respecting what modesty he could. "Your feet," he said, kneeling down to examine them. "Can you feel anything?" "Not really," Beatrice admitted. The fear in her voice was unmistakable now. She had seen men lose toes and fingers to frostbite before, had even known one man who had lost an entire foot. The thought of being crippled, of being even more vulnerable than she already was, terrified her. Benjamin worked in silence, carefully removing her ruined boots and stockings, then wrapping her feet in dry cloth before tucking them under additional blankets. "The feeling will come back," he said with more confidence than Beatrice felt. "Painful as hell when it does, but that means you are not too far gone." He moved around the small space with efficient grace, hanging her wet clothes near the stove to dry, melting snow in a small pot to make water for drinking. Beatrice watched him, trying to understand what kind of man would risk his life to save a stranger, would shoot 3 men to protect a woman he had never met. "Why did you help me?" she finally asked. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames of the stove. "I had a sister once," he said at last. "Margaret. She was 19 when our father arranged a marriage for her to a man who had a reputation for cruelty. She tried to run just like you did, but there was no one to help her, no one to stop our brothers from bringing her back. She married that man, and 6 months later she was dead. He said she fell down the stairs. Everyone knew it was a lie, but nobody did a damn thing about it." The pain in his voice was raw and unmistakable. Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes. "I am so sorry. I swore that day that if I ever saw another woman running for her life, I would not stand by and do nothing," Benjamin said. "So when I saw you come tearing through those woods with 5 men on your heels, well, I did not have to think too hard about whose side I was on." The silence that followed was surprisingly comfortable. Outside, the wind howled and the snow continued to fall, but inside the tiny shack, there was warmth and safety, at least for the moment. Beatrice felt the exhaustion of the day begin to catch up with her, her eyelids growing heavy despite her best efforts to stay awake. "Sleep," Benjamin said gently. "I will keep watch. Your brothers might try to come back, though I doubt it in this storm. Either way, you are safe tonight." "Where will you sleep?" Beatrice asked drowsily. "I have spent plenty of nights sitting up. One more will not kill me." Beatrice wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas. Within minutes she was asleep, wrapped in wool blankets and finally blessedly warm. When she woke, pale winter sunlight was streaming through the single small window, and the storm had passed. Benjamin was exactly where she had last seen him, sitting with his back against the wall near the door, his rifle across his knees. He looked tired but alert, and when he saw her eyes open, he offered a small smile. "How are your feet?" he asked. Beatrice wiggled her toes experimentally and was rewarded with a sharp, tingling sensation that was deeply unpleasant but also reassuring. "They hurt," she said. "I suppose that is a good sign." "Best sign there is," Benjamin agreed. He stood and stretched, his joints popping audibly. "Your dress is dry. We should think about moving on soon. This shack is used by ranch hands during the spring and summer. Someone could show up at any time. Plus, your father and brothers will be looking for you once the weather clears." The reality of her situation came crashing back. Beatrice sat up, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "I have nowhere to go," she said quietly. "No money, no family that will help me, no skills that anyone would pay for. I can cook and clean and sew, but without references, no respectable family would hire me. And even if they did, my father would track me down eventually." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. "There is a town about 30 miles west of here," he said finally. "Ash Fork, Arizona. I have been heading that way myself. It is far enough from Wyoming that your father might not think to look there, at least not right away. And it is growing fast, lots of people moving through. Easier to disappear in a place like that." "Arizona," Beatrice repeated. It seemed impossibly far away, as distant as the moon. "I have never been more than 20 miles from the farm where I was born." "Then maybe it is time for a change," Benjamin said. His gray eyes were kind, and Beatrice felt something shift in her chest, a flicker of hope that she had not felt in years. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You saved my life and now you want to help me get to Arizona? You do not even know me." "Maybe I do not need to know you to see that you deserve better than what you are running from," Benjamin said simply. He hesitated, then added, "And maybe I am tired of riding alone. The road to Arizona is long and dangerous. Company would not be unwelcome." There was something in the way he said it, something vulnerable beneath the gruff exterior, that made Beatrice's heart skip a beat. She looked at this stranger who had appeared in her darkest moment like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray, and she made a decision. "All right," she said. "Arizona it is." The journey south was difficult but not unbearable. Benjamin proved to be a resourceful traveling companion. He had a horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, and he insisted that Beatrice ride while he walked alongside. They moved carefully, avoiding main roads and staying away from towns where someone might recognize Beatrice or ask uncomfortable questions. At night, they made camp in sheltered spots, and Benjamin always maintained a respectful distance, making sure Beatrice felt safe. But as the days passed and Wyoming gave way to Colorado, Beatrice found herself wishing that distance was not quite so pronounced. She caught herself watching the way Benjamin moved, the quiet competence with which he handled every task, from building a fire to tracking game for their dinner. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and the deep, warm sound of his laugh when she said something that amused him. They talked as they traveled, sharing stories of their lives. Beatrice learned that Benjamin had been a cowboy and a ranch hand, that he had drifted from job to job after his sister's death, unable to settle anywhere that reminded him of what he had lost. He was 28 years old, and he admitted with some embarrassment that he had been saving money for 3 years with the vague idea of buying his own small ranch someday. "Nothing big," he said as they rode through a mountain pass, the peaks around them still snow-capped despite the gradually warming weather. "Just enough land for some cattle, maybe some horses. A place where a man could build something that belonged to him, you know." "That sounds wonderful," Beatrice said wistfully. She had never thought about what she might want for herself, only about what was expected of her. The idea that she could choose her own future, could build a life based on her own desires rather than her father's demands, was still strange and new. Benjamin glanced at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Maybe someday," he said quietly, "if things work out the way I hope they might." They crossed into New Mexico territory as winter began to loosen its grip on the land. The snow gave way to mud, and then to dry earth, and the cold mountain air became warmer and more arid. Beatrice had never seen landscape like this, vast and open, with strange rock formations and plants she did not recognize. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, and she found herself falling in love with it. She was also, though she tried not to examine the feeling too closely, falling in love with Benjamin Jameson. It was in the small things, she realized. The way he always made sure she had the warmest spot by the fire. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, as though her thoughts and opinions mattered. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression that was both tender and hungry. They reached Ash Fork, Arizona, on a warm afternoon in early April. The town was larger than Beatrice had expected, a bustling settlement that had grown up around the railroad and the cattle trade. It was rough and rowdy, full of cowboys and miners and merchants, but it also had a sense of possibility, of new beginnings. Benjamin found them rooms at a respectable boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Charlotte Hayes, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who asked no uncomfortable questions when Benjamin explained that his wife had been ill, and they were looking for a place to settle while she recovered. Beatrice's heart had jumped at the word wife, but she played along, knowing that a single woman traveling alone with a man would raise eyebrows and invite trouble. "I will find work," Benjamin said once they were alone in the small parlor of the boarding house. "There are always ranches looking for hands, and I have heard the railroad is hiring. Once I have saved up enough, we can think about what comes next." "Benjamin," Beatrice said softly, "you have already done so much for me. You do not owe me anything more." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes took her breath away. "What if I want to owe you?" he asked. "What if I want to keep riding beside you, keep watching out for you, keep talking to you by the campfire at night? What if somewhere along the road from Wyoming to here, I started hoping that maybe you might want those things too?" Beatrice felt her heart hammering in her chest. "I do want those things," she whispered. "I want them more than I have ever wanted anything in my life. But I am still running, Benjamin. My father is not going to give up looking for me, and Harrison Tucker is not going to let go of what he thinks he paid for. If you stay with me, you are putting yourself in danger." "I shot 3 of your brothers and sent the other 2 running," Benjamin pointed out with a slight smile. "I think I am already in pretty deep. Might as well be in it for the right reasons." He crossed the room to where she stood and took her hands in his. His palms were rough and calloused, the hands of a working man, and Beatrice loved the feel of them. "I know we have not known each other long," he said. "I know this is not how these things usually happen. But somewhere between pulling you out of that snowdrift and watching you fall asleep by the campfire every night, I fell in love with you, Beatrice Langley. And if you will have me, I would like to make that lie I told Mrs. Hayes into the truth. I would like to marry you, proper and legal, and build that ranch I have been dreaming about, and spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to run from anyone ever again." Tears streamed down Beatrice's face, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Benjamin. I think I started loving you the moment you stepped out of those trees and told my brothers to run." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Beatrice felt the last of the fear and uncertainty that had haunted her for so long begin to melt away. She was safe. She was loved. She was home. They were married 3 days later by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through town. Mrs. Hayes stood as witness, along with the local shopkeeper, a jovial man named Mr. Henderson, who seemed delighted to be part of a romance. Beatrice wore a simple dress that Mrs. Hayes had helped her sew from fabric purchased with the last of Benjamin's savings, and Benjamin wore his best shirt and a borrowed tie that he kept tugging at nervously. "Do you, Benjamin Jameson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the preacher asked. "I do," Benjamin said, his voice strong and clear, his eyes never leaving Beatrice's face. "And do you, Beatrice Langley, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Beatrice said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Benjamin did, to the applause and cheers of the small gathering, and Beatrice felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Beatrice's life. Benjamin found work as a ranch hand at a large cattle operation about 5 miles outside of town, and Beatrice took in sewing and laundry to contribute to their savings. They moved out of the boarding house and into a small cabin that Benjamin rented from his employer, one room with a fireplace and a window that looked out over miles of open range. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Beatrice loved every inch of it. She made curtains from scrap fabric and planted a small garden beside the door. Benjamin came home every evening dusty and tired, and Beatrice would have dinner waiting, and they would sit together and talk about their days, making plans for the future they were building together. But the shadow of Beatrice's past was never quite gone. She jumped at unexpected noises and avoided going into town unless absolutely necessary, always afraid that she would look up and see her father or one of her brothers. Benjamin noticed, of course. He noticed everything about her. "We could move on," he said one evening as they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the desert. "Head further west, maybe try California, start completely fresh." Beatrice considered it, then shook her head. "I am tired of running," she said. "I want to stay here. I want to build a life in this place. But I am afraid, Benjamin. I am afraid they will find me, and when they do, they will take me back, or worse." Benjamin put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "They will not take you anywhere," he said firmly. "You are my wife now. That means something, legally and otherwise. And anyone who tries to hurt you will have to go through me first." His confidence was reassuring, but Beatrice could not quite shake the feeling that their peace was temporary, that eventually the past would catch up with them. She was right. It happened on a Saturday in late June. Beatrice had gone into town to purchase supplies, something she did rarely and only during the busiest part of the day when she felt safest among crowds. She was in Henderson's general store, selecting thread for a sewing project when a shadow fell across the counter. "Hello, Beatrice." Her blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. Slowly, she turned to find her father standing behind her, his weathered face hard as stone. Behind him stood William and Samuel, her 2 youngest brothers, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Father," Beatrice said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "you are a long way from home." "So are you," Robert Langley said coldly. "You have caused this family a great deal of trouble, girl. Harrison Tucker is demanding his money back, and your brothers have been injured because of your foolishness. It is time to come home and make this right." "I am not going anywhere with you," Beatrice said. Her hands were shaking, but she kept her chin up. "I am married now. My place is with my husband." Her father's expression darkened. "That marriage is not legal. You did not have my permission. You are coming home and you will marry Tucker as arranged, and we will hear no more of this nonsense." "Actually, the marriage is perfectly legal," a new voice said from the doorway. Benjamin stood there, his posture relaxed but his eyes cold and dangerous. "Beatrice is over 21, which means she does not need anyone's permission to marry, and she is not going anywhere with you." Robert Langley turned to look at Benjamin, his lip curling with contempt. "You are the man who shot my sons. I should have you arrested." "You could try," Benjamin said mildly. "Of course, I would have to tell the sheriff why I shot them. How they were chasing a woman through a blizzard, clearly meaning her harm. How I offered them the chance to leave peacefully, and they refused. I am pretty sure most courts would call that defense of another person. Might not go the way you hope." "She is my daughter," Robert said, his voice rising. "I have a right to see her taken care of properly." "You have a right to nothing," Benjamin said, and now his voice was as hard as granite. "You tried to sell your daughter to a man who would have beaten her, maybe killed her, all for money and land. You sent your sons to drag her back like she was property. You do not get to call that caring for her." For a moment, Beatrice thought her father might actually throw a punch. His face turned red with rage, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But Benjamin did not move, did not flinch, just stood there with that calm, dangerous stillness that said more clearly than words that he was prepared for whatever came next. Finally, it was William who broke the tension. "Father, let it go," he said quietly. "She is married. She looks happy. Maybe we should just let her be." "You stay out of this," Robert snapped, but some of the heat had gone out of his voice. He looked at Beatrice, and for just a moment she thought she saw something that might have been regret in his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by cold pride. "Fine," he said. "Keep your new life, but do not ever think about coming home. As far as I am concerned, I no longer have a daughter." It hurt more than Beatrice had expected. Even knowing what her father had been willing to do to her, even hating him for it, some part of her had still hoped for his approval, his love. But she looked at Benjamin, standing strong and protective in the doorway, and then at her brothers, at the barely healed wounds on their legs where Benjamin's bullets had struck them, and she knew she had made the right choice. "I can live with that," she said quietly. Her father turned on his heel and stalked out of the store, Samuel following close behind. But William lingered for a moment, looking at his sister with something like apology in his eyes. "I am glad you got away," he said softly, so only she could hear. "I hope you will be happy, Bea." Then he too was gone, and Beatrice found herself in Benjamin's arms, shaking with reaction. He held her while she cried, there in the middle of Henderson's general store, not caring who saw or what they thought. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "He is gone. You are free," and she was. The realization washed over her like a cleansing rain. Her father had given her his blessing in the worst possible way, by disowning her. She was no longer part of the Langley family, no longer bound by their expectations or their demands. She was simply Beatrice Jameson, wife to a good man, builder of her own life. The months that followed brought a sense of peace that Beatrice had never known before. Without the constant fear of being found and dragged back, she began to truly settle into her new life. She made friends in town, other women who welcomed her into their quilting circles and church socials. Benjamin continued to work hard, and their savings grew steadily. In September, Benjamin came home with news that made Beatrice squeal with delight. The owner of the ranch where he worked was retiring and selling off parcels of his land. Benjamin had negotiated to buy 200 acres at a price they could afford with their savings, and a small loan from the bank. "It is not much," Benjamin said, but he was grinning like a boy with his first horse. "But the land is good, there is water, and there is a spot that would be perfect for building a house. Our house be a real home." They broke ground in October, and the house rose slowly through the fall and winter, built with Benjamin's labor and the help of other ranch hands who had become friends. It was a simple structure, 2 rooms with a loft, but it had glass windows and a real wooden floor and a stone fireplace that Benjamin built with his own hands. They moved in just before Christmas, and Beatrice cried as Benjamin carried her over the threshold. It was not a palace, not even particularly large, but it was theirs, built on land they owned, a tangible symbol of the life they were creating together. On Christmas morning, Beatrice gave Benjamin his present, a shirt she had sewn from fabric she had saved for months to buy, with careful stitching and buttons that gleamed. Benjamin gave her a rocking chair he had carved himself, smooth and perfect, with her initials carved into the back. "For when we have children," he said shyly, "for you to rock our babies in." Beatrice had thrown her arms around his neck and kissed him until they were both breathless. The idea of children, of a family built on love rather than obligation, filled her with joy. Their first child, a son they named Matthew, was born in late October of 1886. Beatrice labored through the night while Mrs. Hayes and another neighbor woman attended her, and Benjamin paced outside the bedroom, looking pale and terrified every time Beatrice cried out. But when he finally held his son for the first time, all the fear melted away, replaced by wonder. "He is perfect," Benjamin whispered, tears streaming down his face. He is perfect." Beatrice, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at her husband. "We made him," she said. "He is ours." The years that followed were full of hard work and simple joys. Benjamin built up their small ranch, starting with a dozen head of cattle and slowly expanding. Beatrice tended her growing garden and took care of Matthew, who proved to be a lively, curious child with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. In 1888, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Margaret, after Benjamin's sister. She was tiny and delicate, with lungs that could wake the dead when she was hungry. Benjamin doted on her shamelessly, this little girl who bore his sister's name, and Beatrice often found him in the rocking chair at night, holding Margaret and singing softly to her. The ranch prospered. It was never a large operation, but it was successful enough to support them comfortably. Benjamin hired a young ranch hand to help with the work, and Beatrice hired a local girl to help with the house and the children. They were not wealthy, but they were happy, and that was worth more than all the money in the world. In 1890, Beatrice received a letter that surprised her. It was from William, her brother. He wrote that their father had passed away the previous winter and that he thought Beatrice should know. He also wrote that he and Samuel had both married, and that they often thought of her and wondered how she was doing. He did not ask for anything, did not demand she come home for the funeral. He simply wanted her to know that she was not forgotten and that he hoped she was well. Beatrice showed the letter to Benjamin, uncertain how to feel. "I should be sad," she said. "He was my father after all, but I just feel empty. Is that wrong?" "There is no wrong way to feel," Benjamin said gently. He pulled her into his arms and held her while she worked through the complicated emotions. In the end, Beatrice wrote back to William, a brief letter saying that she was well, that she was happy, and that she appreciated him letting her know. She did not go home for the funeral. That part of her life was over, and she had no desire to revisit it. The 1890s brought changes to Ash Fork and to Arizona Territory as a whole. The railroad expanded, bringing more people and more opportunities. The wild, rough edges of the frontier began to smooth out, becoming something more civilized. Benjamin and Beatrice adapted with the times, always looking for ways to improve their ranch and provide for their growing family. In 1893, they welcomed twin boys, Jacob and Samuel, named after Benjamin's father and Beatrice's youngest brother. The twins were a handful from the moment they were born, always getting into mischief and keeping their parents on their toes. Matthew, now 7, took his role as big brother seriously, helping his mother with the babies and trying to teach them everything he knew. Margaret, at 5, was less impressed with the twins and often complained that they were too loud and too messy. But Beatrice also caught her daughter sneaking into the nursery at night to check on them, to make sure they were sleeping well. It made her heart swell with love for all her children, for the family she and Benjamin had built together. In 1898, Benjamin came home with news that filled them both with excitement and trepidation. The ranch adjacent to theirs was for sale, and the owner was willing to sell it to them at a fair price. It would double their land and their herd, but it would also mean taking on significant debt. "What do you think?" Benjamin asked, sitting at their kitchen table with the papers spread out before him. "It is a risk, but it could set us up for the rest of our lives. Could set the children up too, give them something to inherit." Beatrice studied the numbers, her mind working through the possibilities. She had become quite good at managing the ranch's finances over the years, and she could see both the opportunity and the danger. But she also saw the light in Benjamin's eyes, the dream he had been nurturing since before they were married. "I think we should do it," she said. "I think we should take the risk. We have worked so hard to build this life, Benjamin. We deserve to see it grow." They bought the land, and for the next few years they worked harder than ever before. Benjamin hired more hands, and Beatrice took on the task of managing the expanded household and the increased bookkeeping. The children helped as they were able, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of building something lasting. It was not always easy. There were years when the rains did not come and the cattle suffered. There were years when prices were low and they barely broke even. But they persevered together, and slowly the debt was paid down and the ranch became profitable again. In 1902, Beatrice stood on the porch of their home, now expanded to include 4 bedrooms and a proper parlor, and looked out over land that stretched as far as she could see in 3 directions. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, their calves frolicking in the spring sunshine. In the yard, the twins were trying to teach their younger sister, 5-year-old Emma, how to rope a fence post with mixed results. Matthew, now 16, was off checking fence lines with his father, learning the business that would one day be his. Margaret, 14, was inside practicing her piano, filling the house with music. Emma had been a surprise, born when Beatrice was 38 and certain she was done having children. But she had been a welcome surprise, a sweet-natured girl who seemed to bring light wherever she went. Benjamin came riding up from the south pasture, Matthew beside him on a horse his father had given him for his birthday. Father and son were laughing about something, their heads close together, and Beatrice felt her heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. This life, this family, this home, it had all come from a desperate run through a snowstorm 17 years ago, from a cowboy who had decided to help a stranger in trouble, from a choice to take a risk, to trust, to love. Benjamin dismounted and climbed the porch steps, pulling Beatrice into his arms and kissing her soundly, not caring that the children could see and were making exaggerated gagging noises. "What was that for?" Beatrice asked, laughing. "For being you," Benjamin said simply. "For saying yes when I asked you to marry me. For building this life with me. For giving me these beautiful children and this home and everything I ever dreamed of, and things I did not even know I could dream of." "You saved my life," Beatrice said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me freedom and love and a family. I am the one who should be thanking you." "Then we are even," Benjamin said, smiling. "We saved each other." And that, Beatrice thought as she leaned into her husband's embrace, was the simple truth of it. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. The years continued to pass, bringing joys and sorrows as all years do. Matthew married a local rancher's daughter in 1909 and brought his bride to live on the ranch, where he worked alongside his father. Margaret became a teacher and married a banker from Flagstaff, moving away but visiting often with her growing family. The twins grew into strong, capable young men who loved the ranch as much as their father did. Emma, the baby, showed a talent for music and a spirit of adventure that suggested she might not be content to stay in Arizona forever. In 1912, Arizona became a state, and Benjamin and Beatrice celebrated with their neighbors, proud to be part of this new chapter in their territory's history. They were in their late 40s now, graying and lined but still strong, still devoted to each other and to the life they had built. On their 25th wedding anniversary in April of 1911, Benjamin took Beatrice back to the line shack where they had spent that first desperate night together. It was still standing, though barely used now, and they sat inside as the sun set, remembering. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked. "Running away, marrying me, all of it." Beatrice looked at him as though he had lost his mind. "Regret it? Benjamin, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though it meant leaving your family. Even though your father disowned you. Especially because of that," Beatrice said firmly. "That family would have killed my spirit if not my body. But you, Benjamin Jameson, you gave me life. Real life, not just existence. You gave me love and respect and partnership. You gave me children who I adore and a home that I cherish. You gave me myself, Benjamin. You let me be who I was meant to be. How could I ever regret that?" Benjamin pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I love you, Beatrice. More now than I did 25 years ago, if that is possible. You are my whole heart. And you are mine," Beatrice said softly. They sat there as darkness fell, holding each other, grateful for every moment they had been given. The next decades brought grandchildren, more than Beatrice could sometimes keep track of. Matthew and his wife had 5 children. Margaret had 3. The twins both married and started families of their own. Emma, to no one's surprise, moved to San Francisco and became a music teacher, though she too eventually married and had children. Benjamin and Beatrice grew older, their hair turning white, their movements slower. But their love remained constant, a steady flame that never dimmed. They sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the land they had built together, and they counted their blessings. In 1935, on a warm September afternoon, Benjamin Jameson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. He had lived a long, good life, and he died in the home he had built, surrounded by the family he loved. Beatrice mourned him deeply. For 50 years, he had been her partner, her best friend, her truest love. The world seemed dimmer without him in it. But she also felt grateful beyond measure for the life they had shared. Not everyone got 50 years with the love of their life. Not everyone got to build a legacy like the one they had created together. She lived another 5 years, long enough to see great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that the ranch would continue, passed down through generations who would remember the love story that had started it all. She spent those years surrounded by family, telling stories of Benjamin and their life together, making sure that everyone knew what a remarkable man he had been. On a cool April morning in 1940, Beatrice Jameson passed away at the age of 76. She died in the rocking chair Benjamin had made for her, the one with her initials carved into the back, holding a photograph of her husband and surrounded by her children and grandchildren. They buried her next to Benjamin on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky as blue and vast as the love they had shared. The marker reads simply, Beatrice Langley Jameson, 1864–1940. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she ran toward freedom and found love. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own stories to the foundation that Benjamin and Beatrice had laid. And every so often, when the winter snow fell heavy on Arizona's high country, someone would tell the story of how it all began. How a young woman had run for her life through a blizzard, how a cowboy had stepped in to save her, how 3 shots fired in the snow had started a love story that would span a lifetime and create a legacy that would endure long after both of them were gone. It was a story of courage and love, of choosing freedom over fear, of 2 people who had saved each other and built something beautiful from the ashes of a desperate moment. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth celebrating. It was the story of Benjamin and Beatrice Jameson, and it was a love story for the ages.